In question number 5, we have seen that how we can self-host a WCF service in its own app domain, and then we have also seen that how we can host a WCF service on IIS. So what we'll do is that we'll take this theory a bit ahead and start with question number 6. What is the difference of hosting a WCF service on IIS as compared to hosting a WCF service in its own app domain? So let's start with the first point. Who is better? So that's the king. IIS hosting is much better over self-hosting. Now there are two reasons for it. One is the automatic activation and another is process recycling. Okay, so what does it mean? So let's first start with automatic activation. Now whenever you're talking about a service, you need to ensure that the service should always be running. So if you are hosting your service in its own app domain, then you need to ensure that your service is always up and running either as a Windows process or either as a Windows application or whatever it is. But in case of IIS, we don't need to take care of all these things because IIS is already a service which is up and running. So what IIS does is that it automatically activates the service whenever there is any request to be fulfilled. So as soon as the service gets a request or as soon as the request is sent to IIS, it just activates the service, uses the service and fulfills the request. So that's the first point. In case of self-hosting, you need to ensure that your service is always up and running, but in case of IIS hosting, you don't need to do that. Now let's talk about the second advantage of hosting your WCF service in IIS, and that is process recycling. Now whenever we talk about WCF service, it's very much possible that your WCF service can have a bad code or can have a memory leak. Okay. Now what IIS does is that it says, okay, is there a bad code? Is there a memory leak? Yes. Then please go and recycle this process. Okay, let me explain in detail what happens. Let's say that your browser instance has requested a WCF service. So what IIS does is that it creates a worker process, okay, and this worker process creates an object of a WCF service and fulfills that request. Once it fulfills the request and the browser instance is closed or the client closes its instance, the IIS basically just goes and restarts the worker process and does the cleaning. So in other words, IIS basically manages your memory recycling of your WCF service, and definitely this is very healthy for a system. So and your system can really become scalable. Okay. Now when we talk about hosting your WCF logic in your own app domain, you need to rewrite this whole logic by yourself, and definitely that's a bit of a big development work by itself. So there are two things which you get in IIS. Automatic activation, which ensures that you don't need to run the service forever because your IIS is a service by itself which is ensured running forever, and it activates the WCF service when needed. And second is your bad memory management, which is handled by process recycling. So let's see how the process recycling is basically handled in IIS. So here are different websites in IIS. Okay. Now if you go to the properties of the website, you'll find that in the home directory, every website is basically assigned to an app pool. Now let's go to the app pool property. So here's your application pools. Let's click on default app pool. Now there you will find the configuration parameters for recycling. So for example, you can say, okay, my recycling should occur in some minutes, my recycling should occur after some request, etc. So it's more of a configuration which you can do on the recycling process of IIS. So when you host your WCF service in IIS, all these things comes as a bonus points, even the performance, health, identity, etc. Because the IIS becomes a main cover under which your WCF service is hosted. So does it mean that IIS is the only way, or IIS is the best way to go for hosting, or is the best way to host your WCF service? No, it depends from project to project. It varies from project to project. For example, if a project is saying, okay, I want to support TCP protocol, HTTP protocol and FTP protocol, let's say, then definitely your service cannot be hosted in IIS because IIS only supports HTTP protocol, because the main intention of IIS or the main use of IIS is basically as a web server, and web server only supports HTTP protocol. So in other words, whenever you make an architectural decision, where to host your WCF service, you should ask yourself am I going to support more than one protocol? If the answer is yes, then definitely you need to go for self-hosting. But if let's say that your project is saying, okay, I want to only support HTTP protocol, then IaaS is the way to go. Or I'll say, if your project only needs HTTP protocol support, then IaaS is the only way to go, because you get all these properties or all these advantages of IaaS as bonus points. I hope that this session was useful, and in the coming up sessions, we will be discussing more from the aspect of the different bindings of WCF.